up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. Robert Bernstein, you were talking, you got caught. Haha, you look stupid. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Filmed some real stupid shit over the weekend. Excited to get it out. The nice part about being home.
That's what I like to hear. I like to know that when we're not on the road, you're filming stupid shit.
Oh, this is the most highly produced, stupidest thing I've done yet. Check it out.
Really?
Rob's Newsroom on YouTube. It will be out this week.
Ooh, that was quite a good promo. I like that. You've got me excited. And of course, then this weekend, me and you are going back up to Boston. Very excited for that. I haven't been to Boston in too long, and it's only a few days away now. The 27th, 28th, and 29th, we will be up at Laugh Boston, comicdavesmith.com for those tickets. And then I'm off to the races doing a lot of traveling. And a bunch for stand-up, and then some other big podcasts coming up. comicdavesmith.com. There's also Nashville is next. I think there's still some tickets for those shows. And then we'll be on the road for the rest of the year. I know you got some other headline gigs coming up, Rob. Isn't that right?
I got a Steamboat. I think it's April 5th and 6th. And the weekend after that, I've got Des Moines. I think I finally got that right. Hanging out at a libertarian event. Scott Horton's there the next night. I think Joshua Smith lives out there. He got some cool stuff going on. So come hang out. I'm doing a stand-up Friday night.
All right, sounds good. All right, well let's get into it for today. There's a lot going on in the world. There are a few things that we specifically wanted to talk about, and I guess I sometimes I wonder. I'm like at a point right now. I don't know if this is true, but I think probably of all the times that I've been in this podcasting game, which has been a decent amount of time at this point, there's probably never been a period of time where I've felt like there was more, that was more interesting, or there's more just kind of like incredible things going on where you're like, oh, this is like truly historic. There's also, there's kind of never been a time where there were more options of what to talk about and more distractions than right now. I just found it kind of interesting as I'm like preparing for the show, and I'm kind of like, all right, well, yeah, this seems like a lot of do about nothing. See, this kind of seems like a distraction. And then I'm like trying to more and more focus on like, what are the major things going on right now? And to in some ways, I was like a little bit torn because, as I've mentioned, to you, Rob, several times, and to all of you listeners, one of the things, it's almost easy at this point to like ignore the Democrats. Like right now, you could almost find yourself just being like, well, they're down and out, they're losers, they're irrelevant. The corporate media is irrelevant, all of this. So let's just focus on this. But I can't help but feeling that, number one, it's a really interesting story where the Democrats go from here, and that it's actually something important to talk about. Like when you see one of the major two political parties more defeated than at any point in my life, it's like, are they going the way of the Whigs? Are they going to make some giant comeback? You know what I mean? Like, and what exactly is what is going to be changed about the Democrats going forward? Because it's got to be something. And anyway, that's just something that's been on my mind, and it's kind of what the first two clips that I have on today's show are about that topic. Just to be clear, I don't mean to suggest that like we should prioritize focus on this over focus on what the current administration is doing. I think we could try to do both over the next coming weeks and months, but I do find it very interesting when there is when the recent events have been so devastating for the Democrats, and then you see all of these different kind of competing forces and these competing ideas, if you want to call them that, of what we do going forward. I do find that interesting. Okay, so why don't we could jump right into this. I'd say let's start with the first video that I sent you, Alex, which is Ellie Mistel. I don't think I ever had that name memorized, but I know he is the fat black guy with white hair on MSNBC. I know that much about him. I've seen him many times, and he's an unforgettable figure. to see. But I do have to say, now I know this is a little bit unfair because this is MSNBC and no one watches, but I did find this to be really interesting because with all of the kind of different, the dynamic is that essentially, I think Democrats were denying reality for a very long time. Denying reality in any area of life, I think most people who are, let's say, adult age people, maybe say 25 and over, have probably at least once in their life, if not a few times, learned what is an invaluable life lesson. It applies to all areas of life, but that denying reality is a dangerous game, and reality has a way of slapping you in the face when you ignore it. You can ignore reality, but the fact is it's still reality. And that eventually, like if you're ignoring gravity and you jump off a balcony, reality is going to slap you in the face. In this case, it would be the ground. And what Democrats are dealing with by and large is that they staked out very unpopular positions for many years. They denied the unpopularity of those opinions. They denied the mental state of the former president of the United States of America. They denied a lot. And that reality came and slapped them in the face. And now they can't deny it anymore. So they're all making different attempts to grapple with it and different attempts to strategize. Here is the latest that I've seen on MSNBC.
Okay, so like what?
Well, we could eliminate all voter registration laws. See, when Democrats get in charge, we try to protect voting rights. We don't make voting easier. Now, I'm all for voter eligibility requirements. We might disagree about what those requirements should be, but I'm going to say that there should be an age limit to vote. I might say 16, you might say 18, but I'm not going to say 8. Right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to agree that there should be voter eligibility requirements. But once you're eligible, why do you have to pre-register? Why is that even a thing? It wasn't a thing in this country at the founding. We didn't have voter pre-registration in 1787. We didn't have voter pre-registration in 1821. We only started having voter registration, generally speaking, after the Civil War. Why do you think that is? It's because a bunch of freed African slaves were migrating up north, and all of a sudden New York was like, we need some registration up in here, right? A bunch of immigrants from Europe, mainly Ireland and Italy, were coming to New York. People were like, oh, we need some registration in here. If you're eligible to vote, you should be automatically registered to vote, and that is how they do it everywhere else but us. Everywhere else but us either has automatic registration or some other form of forced registration for everybody, so that you don't have this disconnect between eligible voters and registered voters. That's the first law in the book that we could change. And it's to see how that's different than just saying we have to protect voting rights. No. We don't have to protect voting rights. We have to expand voting rights so that the 90 million people that sat on the couch and sat out this last election between democracy and fascism, so that maybe they have a little bit of an easier time to get up off the couch and come participate in the democracy.
All right. Now, I think it might be fairly obvious why this caught my eye. I just think there's a lot that was just kind of packed in there, and we can get into it. I'd like to kind of parse all this out. Rob, I don't know if you're for voter registration, but if you are, you're racist. That's the takeaway. But isn't it there seems to me to be something of an interesting admission kind of buried within this strategy, which is essentially that we've kind of given up on the electorate. It's like, look, I don't think we can win with this electorate. So what if we get all these other people who aren't voting? It's funny to me, what the mentality of this would be, because you're saying 90 million people sat out the last election between democracy and fascism. And yet those are the people you're counting on? The people who saw, democracy versus fascism on the ballot and couldn't even be bothered to, it's a pretty minimal effort what it takes to vote. I've never talked to any voter. Maybe I'm just talking to the wrong groups of people, but I've never talked to any voter who is like, it is just insane what they make you go through. in order to vote. There's lots of other things where that would be my complaint. Like, it's insane what it takes for me to build a fence in my backyard. That is genuinely insane. It's insane that I have to go down and wait in a line and pay a fee and then come back months later just to put a goddamn garden in my fucking backyard. But I've never heard anyone say that about voting. But now you have these people who would not step over the tiniest hurdle in the world in order to save democracy, and your plan is to eliminate that hurdle. Just doesn't seem like the best strategy ever. I don't know. Any thoughts on any of this, Rob?
Well, that certainly stood out to me when he said that there were 90 million voters, I guess, who decided not to vote against what did he say? Tyranny? He didn't quite use that word, but that's what he's implying. It was the end of democracy, and 90 million people just didn't show up. I mean, clearly it wasn't the end of democracy, because I'd have to think that 90 million people, if all they needed to do was register to vote and we could keep our democracy, they'd probably do so. So speaking to that, I mean, this guy who looks like he was drawn by Dilbert, like he's just a cartoon character, and this is clearly nonsense that, you know, it was the end of our democracy and just 90 million people weren't engaged. No, you didn't earn those people's votes.
Yes, the point is, we don't believe you. We don't believe that this was the end of our democracy. Yes.
Yeah, that was clearly nonsense. And he didn't sell those people. And, you know, you and I have done hundreds of episodes explaining why the Democrats were not the better option in this past election. So the starting point of your analysis just being 90 million people were uninterested in keeping the democracy, it's because you're lying. With that being said, I think that there absolutely should be a requirement to show your identification in order to vote. And there should be a mechanism that ensures the fact that you're actually a U.S. citizen. And the fact that apparently acquiring IDs is racist is something that the government should fix, because there's so many other activities that you require ID for. So if you would just think about all of the ways that our society seems to be racist, because apparently people can't drive cars, they can't purchase alcohol, they can't check into hotels. And the fact that the government doesn't want to fix that process and make it easier for people to just partake in civil society, I mean, we should be addressing the racism issue of our government, that it makes it hard for minorities to acquire IDs. With that said, removing voter registration, but keeping the fact that you have to have your ID to prove you're a U.S. citizen, I don't care if there's a registration process.
Yeah, listen, I'll be honest, I don't particularly care either. I just find this line of argument to be so flawed and just inaccurate. I mean, look, when he says at the beginning, he goes, look at the founding of the country, you didn't have to register to vote. It's like, okay, that is true, but you're also invoking a time when only white male landowners could vote. And so if you're framing voter registration as some type of restriction on voting rights, right? I mean, that's how he framed it. We're expanding voter rights. It's like, well, then I don't really think that this would be the example to look to. And I do think that there's something, you know, because there is something about the modern woke historian that will essentially insist that the entire, you know, all of history can be understood as it used to be racist. That's, you know, it used to be racist, or maybe it used to be sexist. And if we want to go really far, it used to be homophobic or something like that. But that's basically all of history. But it's just what, I don't know. It's an interesting, you know, additional piece of information that it was also restricted to landowners, and that free white men still could not vote if they didn't own land. And there was a concept behind that, and you can agree or disagree with that, but the idea was that if we're voting over how to spend the treasury, you know, which of course was a much smaller pot at the time, but if we were voting over like how to spend public money, you couldn't allow people with nothing to have a say in that too, because there's no incentive there for them to not vote all the stuff for themselves, and then we're all poor together. And that you actually had to be somewhat, you had to be in the owner class in society in order to make decisions. Now, again, you can disagree with that. There's flaws in that way of looking at things, but there also is an argument to the fact that, like, yeah, owners get to make decisions about what's done with things that people who don't own it don't get to make. And that is to some degree important. Now, his point about how these voter registration laws were put into effect after the Civil War or during periods of mass immigration, I certainly would not argue. In fact, I don't think anyone could really argue that there haven't been voter restrictions in the past that were intentionally designed to keep some people out, or that were just abused in practice, thinking literacy tests or things like that. Now, that being said, it does not necessarily follow from that you ought to have the view that there should be absolutely no standard or absolutely no minimal, like test before you get to vote. Like, for example, let's just say that it wasn't abused, right? Like, let's just say it's just a hypothetical. And if your answer to this would be like, well, I don't support it because it can be abused in practice, that's a totally reasonable answer. I'm just saying, in theory, in a hypothetical, would a literacy test necessarily be wrong? Like, should, we're voting over who gets to rule the most powerful government in the history of the world here. Would it be, if, let's just say hypothetically, there were a way to enforce it that wasn't discriminatory and wasn't unfair, but it was just like, hey, like, if you can't read a chapter, like if you can't read at 3rd grade level, then you don't get to vote. Is that in itself, in principle, draconian or awful or something like that? Because I got to say, I don't think it is. I actually think it's kind of crazy, the idea that illiterate people get to vote. Now, again, I'm not saying I would necessarily support that restriction because it can be abused, but I do think that, like, it's interesting when you have a situation where there is nobody today. I mean, this guy, I guess, would make that argument, but I don't think any serious person can really say that voter registration is done to target Black people or to target a certain group of people or keep them out. And I do just find something interesting about the question of, like, is the minimum requirement, like, let's just say I said you have to put pants on and go outside. You know what I mean? And you were like, we got to get rid of this requirement. You're kind of like, wait, who is it you're trying to get to vote? What is it? You're telling me that the person who can't figure out registering to vote or doesn't care enough to figure it out and go do it, that it's that important to make sure that guy's voice counts too? I just find this to be a very strange, like, again, I'm with you, Rob. I'm not saying, like, I'm not married to the idea of voter registration. Should you automatically be registered? Perhaps. I guess maybe my issue in it is, like, in the same sense of, like, how, like, you might have a job interview, like, at 8 in the morning, and, like, half the test of that interview is just like, hey, can you show up on time at 8 in the morning? Looking presentable, like, they're just the lowest form of, like, prove to me that you're participating in society here. And just for that reason alone, I tend to go, like, I'm not sure I want to make it easier to vote. I think before you vote in the popularity contest of who rules over me, maybe there should be some minimum requirement that you meet. Does that make sense?
I don't know that I agree with it, but it certainly makes sense. I get where you're coming from.
Well, it just seems like they're trying to stick up for the person who can't do any of that. They're like, man, if we could get those people, maybe we could, you know what I mean? It's the same reason, like, who the hell wants 16-year-olds voting? Like, I don't know. This just already shows something about you. 16 years old? He's like, oh, look, we got to set the age somewhere. It's like, okay, granted. And we all agree it's not 8, because I might say 16, you say 18. I mean, think about the fact that, like, listen, dude, if an adult had consensual sex with a 16-year-old, we all think they should go to fucking jail for a long, long time. And why is that? Because, like, a 16-year-old can't really consent to an adult. It doesn't matter if they said it or you're just so psychologically and mentally more powerful than them that you are just totally, like, it's just taking advantage of, like, prey in order for you to like extract some form of consent out of them. So who the hell are these people who it's like, that's where you want to go for your voting base? Like, you got to look at the people who are fucking 16 and then the people who couldn't figure out how to register for a vote. And that's who you want to be, you know what I mean? To be your reinforcements. Like, I find it disturbing. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Hexclad. Guys, if you're trying to cook healthier or save money or just stop eating microwavable burritos, Hexclad has got you covered. It's time to leave behind the delivery fees and that scratched up pan you've been dealing with since college. You've probably already heard how Hexclad has completely revolutionized pots and pans by combining the performance of stainless steel with the convenience and easy cleanup of nonstick. But Hexclad's innovation doesn't stop there. Their Japanese Damascus steel knives are as sharp as they are tough, perfect for leveling up your meal prep. The sleek pepper mill lets you season like a pro with precision and style. Hexclad's Japanese Damascus steel knives are not just tools, they're works of art designed to make your time in the kitchen effortless. These knives are forged from 67 layers of premium Japanese Damascus steel, giving you incredible durability and edge retention. And just like all Hexclad products, they have a lifetime warranty. They've also got the pans that truly check every single box when it comes to picking your cookware. Plus, their patented laser-etched hexagon steel ridges boost your searing power. These are the best pans you'll ever own. And for a limited time, our listeners can get 10% off your order with this exclusive link. Just head to hexclad.com/problem. Support our show and get yourself some incredible cookware at hexclad.com/problem. Make sure to let them know that you heard about them on the Part of the Problem podcast and enjoy the revolutionary cookware. All right, let's get back into the show.
It certainly sounds like the wrong pitch instead of, hey, 90 million people are unengaged in our political process. And so I think we need to figure out how to speak to these other individuals.
Yeah.
What are the rights that will get them to show up and vote for? How do we compel these people to engage? And then make up some bullshit of, I know that these are the people that would be better represented by the Democratic Party. And so we just have to figure out how to reach out to them. But to just say, hey, we have to make it easier for these people who are unengaged to show up. That's not, firstly, it doesn't seem like a winning strategy. I don't think the voter registration is what's getting in the way of these people voting. So you're just talking nonsense here. But now you're also just thinking like, how do I just get bodies here? Like, how do we not change any policy? How do we not change what we're doing? How do I just figure out how to win this game and get more bodies showing up? Because we can't vote the corpses anymore. We lost that one. We did it once and it worked for us. So what's our new scheme? We can't get immigrants over the border because we're not in control anymore. We were trying that one. So what do we have left? I don't know. We can make it easier for the other 90 million people to show up and offer them some free stuff and maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. That's what it seems like to me. And there's, like I said before, there's such an admission that you feel like you can't win with the electorate as it is. And look, like, I don't know. I just, the Democrats, you're like, if you look around, you'd be like, hey, look, I mean, obviously you lost pretty bad in this election, but you know, Donald Trump's approval rating, from what I've seen, has been hovering between 47 and 53%. That's not like, oh my God, it's insurmountable. We could, you know what I mean? Like, there's a good chunk of the country who's opposed to Donald Trump, maybe not a majority, but very close to half of the electorate is opposed to him. And like, you ran the most god-awful candidate ever. So you would sit there and be like, okay, all we got to do is like figure out a good candidate, figure out a good message, actually stand for something, actually do something for the American people. Instead, this like going to, well, let's see if we can't win over the people who are totally not engaged. And then, of course, the other major flaw in this strategy is that, like, look, this is... Okay, so I don't know if I've ever told you this story before, but I always love this. Now, this is something I've never done in my life in stand-up comedy. I don't think it's something you've ever done, but it is an old thing that you've probably heard of, been done before. But I remember this one time I was watching this comic and he was bombing, having a real rough one. and it's just the crowd hated him. Nothing's going over. He's now he's getting heckled, and he hasn't gotten any laughs the whole set. And then at one point he goes, so one of the guys was heckling him, and he goes, "Oh yeah, dude, you think this is so easy? You want to try to do my job?" And he offers him the microphone to come on stage and come do it. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of this old, you know what I'm saying? You ever heard that? But I remember thinking to myself, I was a young comic at the time too, but I was like, oh man, this guy's instincts are so bad that he doesn't even get what that old game is. Like, okay, I've never done this, and I would never give up the microphone at a stand-up comedy show. I feel like that's yours. You're the comedian. You get the microphone. You don't give that up. But the way that old dealing with a heckler thing works is that you're killing with the crowd. The crowd loves you. One guy starts heckling and you go, oh, you think this is so easy? Come up here, do that. This guy's totally unprepared to be a comedian. He gets on stage with a microphone. The whole crowd is rooting for this guy to lose. And so the cards are totally stacked against him. You're going to win this thing because you came as a professional comedian with jokes and he has nothing. You don't do that move when you're dying, when the crowd doesn't like, because God forbid this guy grabs the microphone and says one funny thing that like gets some laughs. And now not only did you bob your ass off in this set, but then this guy came and got laughs, and it's the worst moment in the history of the world. So anyway, the comic was given, like, the manager of the club came in and broke it up, said, you can't have the microphone, and brought the next comedian on stage. It was a whole nightmare situation. Anyway, the point I'm making is this move has a prerequisite to it. Okay, well, we're going to abolish voting registration. Well, that would have to be done with federal legislation, which you do not control. You have to get power back first. So this is all like the prerequisite to all of this is that you have to win back power first, meaning you can't telegraph this strategy. You can't sit there and go, hey, listen, voting electorate, I know you've rejected us, but if you elect us again, we are going to dilute down your votes with bodies who we think we can manipulate more easily. This was a good strategy for when Joe Biden was in and the Democrats had Congress. Be like, do this now, hush, hush, we say quietly at a boardroom meeting somewhere, and then we won't have to worry about this next time. It does not work as the underdog strategy to announce this as your plan to regain power. If you get what I'm saying there. So I just find this funny that this is the musing. Like on MSNBC, as the ratings are collapsing, they're going, I know what we're going to do. Use all this power we have in the federal government to overhaul voting. Anyway, as no matter how much you can try to spin this and try to play this as like, you know, it's all these disenfranchised people or something that we're trying to give a voice. The bottom line is that when you've taken a shellacking and you're on a network whose ratings are collapsing, when you come out here and go, we need to be able to get a whole different electorate, I don't see how that doesn't come off as weak and desperate. That'd kind of be my final thought. Any final thoughts on this one, Rob?
I hope he returns to the Dilbert cartoon in which he came.
I mean, we can only pray. We can only pray. All right, let's there was another. I'm actually maybe a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but I wanted to go to this next clip because this was from Bill Maher's show, kind of more or less on the same theme. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I did not actually know this. So Bill Maher opened talking about kind of like the future of gerrymandering and results of the great migration shifts within the United States of America over the last few years. Anyway, let's go to this clip because I did find this really fascinating. Here is Bill Maher from this Friday.
But just to continue on this for a minute, because I just saw this really bad news for Democrats. 2030 reapportionment, there's a group called the American Redistricting Project, and in 5 years we will be redistricting. California is projected to lose 3 seats, New York 2, also going to lose a seat, Minnesota, Oregon, Rhode Island, Illinois, all blue states. Who's getting these? Texas, Florida, Idaho, and Utah. I mean, this looks like game over, you know, and the reason why people are voting with their feet is a lot of what your book is about.
Yeah,
Taxes and regulation. I certainly been screaming about it forever. I did 3 years with a sign here that said, how long is it going to take me to get my solar hooked up? 3 years. Talking about it on television in this state. You couldn't do it. This state has almost 400,000 regulations. I just put in a new roof because the fire, I thought, oh, let's get a roof that's not going to burn up. 2 inspections. Why are you inspecting my roof? It's my fucking roof. If it falls on me, that's my problem. And we're taxed more than any other state. People are leaving these kind of states for places where they're not, they feel the heavy breath of government on them. It's not that hard for Democrats to understand this, but they seem to be incapable of doing anything about it.
I thought that was a really powerful rant from Bill Maher, and it's very interesting. I didn't realize how soon it was coming and how many seats were going to be going from blue states to red states. But he's not wrong. I mean, that's a really big deal. I think he rattled off 10 or 11 seats, and in a closely divided Congress. I mean, that's a really big deal to take 10 or 11 seats and give them to the other side, which theoretically is where that's going. And it was interesting to me to see kind of like a group of 3 liberals who were all at that table having to kind of grapple with this fact that taxes and regulations, like big government, is unpopular. And of course it is. It wouldn't be government if it wasn't. You know what I mean? Like, it would be done voluntarily if it were popular. I think that probably there's a bit more to it than that. I don't think it's as simple as taxes and regulation, but undeniably, that is a huge component to this. And it is, you know, when you have, and again, I don't want to do the thing that a lot of Democrats are doing right now, where they're going like, they're acting like Donald Trump and Elon Musk were me and you, like we took over. You know, Crystal Ball said anarcho-capitalism is the driving ideology behind all these guys, and you know their mission is to destroy government or something like that. But when you kind of broadly, at least in the American people's minds, have the idea that, okay, the Republican Party is like, if I had a loose sketch of this, they're talking about how there's fraud and abuse in government, how there's a swamp, how there's a deep state, and we have to kind of like roll that back. And then you have the Democrats over here who are like the party of government, the party of we need rules and regulations and all of these things. It's very challenging to be the party of government when all of your major cities where you guys are the government are a disaster, are all like the poster boy for inept, corrupt government. That is a tricky position to be in. And that's really, I think, what's going on in a lot of these big cities. What are your thoughts, Rob?
I didn't realize Bill Maher was such a libertarian. Hey, this is my roof. Why do I need the government coming in here and tell me how I should operate my own roof? I guess I should dig in a little bit more on just how much migration there's been from these large states. I'm sure that the problem for the Democrats is going to be amplified if there actually is a mass movement of illegal migrants out of the country. And I'd love to see actual figures on that of exactly how many people came over and what that means for congressional seats, particularly as a lot of them did make their way to New York because there were good social services for a period of time, including hotel stays. And then even Republican governors were just busting them right up in there, which was actually a good strategy for educating the public at large, but it might have been a bad strategy for congressional seats. But anyways, it is, I think one of the, it happened in New York State. They got a massive federal bailout during COVID. And I thought that that was bad because we need to showcase bad liberal policies in order for people to actually realize that they're failed policies and to make the correction of people leaving these areas because it's corrective. And I think, you know, it kind of showcases the bad policy failing when it actually fails. And I guess that this is a pretty good storyline that Republicans are going to pick up this many congressional seats. I didn't realize that it was that big. What's that? It was like 12 seats he just mentioned. It's pretty big.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Well, I think that there's basically been, I think, since really since 2020, late 2020, early 2021, the exodus out of California and New York has really just not stopped. I mean, I think it's had higher and lower moments.
Dude, I think
but
Hollywood's over. Like,
Yeah.
I listen, I can't prove this to you, but it just seems that there's actually a lot more independent filming going on now, and it seems like more and more Hollywood projects are taking place in other areas. And I wonder how much star power really wants to hang out in that state versus going to new areas and just, with more favorable taxes and the works. Like, why is everyone hanging on to California?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if you've seen. I mean, these are the things that I don't like. The stories that don't typically interest me that much. But I don't know if you've seen. Everybody's making a big deal out of this Snow White movie. I guess just totally flopped. And I
There
feel
was fun beef though. I didn't totally follow the story, but there was fun beef between Gal Gadot and the other lady because they were both making like opposing political views of her being pro-Palestinian and Gal Gadot being the gorgeous Israeli. And so they got some bad press up front over that. And I just thought that princess drama pouring off screen of dissenting political views in the Disney environment, I dug in zero other than seeing the headline, but I just thought that drama was hilarious.
All I saw was, and I kind of feel bad because the girl seems so young. I mean, I don't know how old she is. She's at her oldest in her early 20s. But the girl who's like the star of it was, she had several interviews where she was like, just kind of like shitting on the old version and being like, the original was made in 1937 and like you can totally tell, and we're not going to be doing that whole thing where we're waiting for a prince and we're doing that. She's 23. Okay, so I thank you. But so I'm really hesitant to ever like try to trash anyone that age because like I don't know what she's doing is just the typical thing that we all did as adolescents. It's one of the unfortunate qualities, but it's also probably like a necessary quality. Like when you're young, you have this tendency to be like, I've sized up the whole world and you know what? It's all bullshit. The grown-ups are all wrong. And that's, there's some positive in that as well as some negative. As you get older, you're supposed to kind of gain a little bit more respect for your elders and be like, actually, maybe they did have a point. Maybe they learned a few lessons that I had to learn myself. But there is something about it that's very unappealing. If it's very unappealing to listen to a teenager talk about how their parents are assholes and you're kind of like, all right, yeah, but they're working their ass off to give you everything you have. So, but so I'm not like, but there is something, about watching. It's not her, like whatever, she's a young girl and she's probably very talented and is probably part of the reason why she's here. What's crazy is that all the adults around her, meaning Hollywood, put this front and center and then expected this to like sell well, and evidently they took a huge flop on like the money they put in versus how many people want to see this thing. I just think there's something about this where the point that we've gotten to where they almost seem incapable of readjusting and going like, okay, we got to drastically cut overhead and really put out a product that our consumer base wants to see. And they're just incapable of doing it. And so I agree with you. I mean, like, I don't know what the future of Hollywood is, but there seems no reason to me why there should be any future. And why the hell do you need these big studios anymore? The people you got little, I mean, I know this from my work, I'm sure you do too, Rob, but there are these little, there are little production companies that you could pay like 20, 30 grand that can make like fucking magic happen. And some of these, I mean, if you had like a few $100 grand to pay them, they could make a badass, cool looking movie for you. It's like, why is it exactly that you need these big studios at that point? Anyway, to Bill Maher's thing, if you really want to look at it, and I think there's probably someone could dig into the data and really find numbers to support this. But the fact is that where when people really started fleeing out of the big cities in this country, and like me and you are kind of two examples of this, Rob, but it was during COVID. And it was the fact that the blue cities, look, everybody locked down. With all due respect to Kristi Noem, who was the governor of South Dakota, she did not. But it's still South Dakota. But for the rest of the country, everybody did the lockdowns. But like the blue states just hung on so much longer and were so much stricter. And it was way past the point, way past the point where everyone had already come to terms with what level of risk they were comfortable with the virus. And so they just kept these cities shut down. This is a big part of the reason why Austin had such a huge, surge, because people wanted to find a city where you could still go to a restaurant, where you could still be normal, where you didn't have to wear a mask everywhere, all this stuff. And then also as a result of those prolonged lockdowns, the homelessness, the drugs, the crime, I mean, all of these things just got materially worse in all of the blue cities. And it is one of those things where it's pretty easy for somebody who is, let's just say, even slightly leans conspiratorial, for them to just go, oh, George Soros is intentionally trying to destroy the United States of America. Like, why else would you do this? Well, if your plan was to have prolonged lockdowns and at the same time period say, we're going to stop prosecuting property crime, we're also at the same time going to say homeless people are allowed to build encampments on public sidewalks wherever they want to. I mean, like, what? Who could be shocked that people were like, oh, I think I might move then? Like, what did you think the result of all of this was going to be? That people would just, accept it? And it's no, people are moving. And then the really sick thing, right? This is what's so bizarre and I guess seemingly ironic on first glance, but I think not actually ironic once you dive into it. But when you see, let's say when you see people leaving, let's say Los Angeles and New York City by the hundreds of thousands every year, hundreds of thousands pouring out of the cities. And by the way, I should be clear, this was happening before COVID. It picked up after the lockdowns. But when you see that, well, if you dig a little bit deeper and look into who's moving, it's almost all middle class, upper class people. That's who's leaving. Now, you could sit there and say, oh, that's because of the taxes. Part of that's true. But the other major part of that is that, working class and poor people just can't afford to move. They just don't have that luxury. I mean, if you're a working class guy and you've got a job, you can't really just pick up and move. Also, there's big expenses to interstate moving. You may not have that option. And so the whole bottom 50% of all of these major cities are essentially just stuck. Many of them would move if they could. They just don't have that option. And it's a pretty terrible thing to do to people, is to kind of make them, I don't know exactly what the number is, how many people would leave these cities if they had the opportunity to, but don't. But there's a lot. There's a lot of people who are essentially just trapped in these cities as they become objectively much worse places to live. And that is, that is a real albatross around the Democrats' neck that I don't know exactly how they're going to get rid of. Like, how are they going to deal with the fact that it's like, yeah, you literally had full control of these areas and made them such nightmares that even the people there wanted to leave? Because all things being equal, people tend to want to stay where they are. All things being equal, you're like, I live here. I don't know. It's a pain in the ass to leave. And that thing's got to be pretty bad before they make people leave en masse like that. So rough time for the Dems. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Sheath Underwear. I've been telling you about them for years and years now. The best pair of boxer briefs you will ever own, the most comfortable underwear I have ever put on my body, and the only underwear that I ever wear at this point. Also, longtime sponsors of this show, so make sure you go support Sheath. Sheath creates amazing underwear, and if you don't love them, they have a 100% money-back guarantee off your first pair. Plus, they have an amazing line of underwear for women as well, so it's not just for us fellas. Go check them out at sheathunderwear.com and use the promo code PROBLEM for 20% off. They ship anywhere in the world. One more time, sheathunderwear.com, promo code PROBLEM for 20% off. All right, let's get back into the show. I don't know. Any other thoughts on this one, Rob?
I bet remote work also is a variable that you're no longer necessarily restricted to having to live in major cities in order to work your careers, which is also a result of Democratic or nationwide policy that was a little bit more sold by the Democrats through the COVID regime.
Yes, that is that's a good point. A very good point. As that probably did have a huge impact on it too. Once you're working from home, you have a lot more options of what you can do. And a lot of people who have jobs, jobs are a big thing that draws people into cities. And once you could have that job from somewhere else, you could probably have a lot more, a much bigger home for the same price or whatever. And a lot of people probably chose that. All right. Fair point there, Rob. All right. Let's move over to this appearance by Tom Homan. Am I saying his name right? Is it Homan? I think so.
I think Homan, but
Homan? The Border Czar. He really does. His personality really is much more of the Border Czar than any name that you could come up with. That seems like that should have been what his parents named him. Anyway, he was
I would
on
go with Officer Hardass.
Yeah,
that should literally be his name from birth. First name Officer, last name Hardass.
Well, look, he's a character for sure, and in some ways you can understand why he's an appealing character to be the Border Czar. I've always been a little bit of two minds about the guy. Like I do think that it's like the immigration policy under Joe Biden was beyond nuts. I think it was suicidal and horrible. And I think you need kind of someone like this, maybe almost to clean up that mess. It also does, like, my libertarian spidey senses go off where I go, this is everything about the beginning of a dystopian movie where this guy's in charge and is like, we're just going to clean up the problem. Okay, so there's been a lot being made about the way that the Trump administration is going about some of these deportations. And Haman was on This Week on ABC to discuss. Go ahead.
If I can give a very short synopsis. So
Sure.
essentially, a number of supposed Venezuelan gang members were flown to a jail in El Salvador, which is seemingly probably one of the worst jails on the planet. Now, both sides of the story stink in that I don't think district judges should be able to basically overrule the president. And that becomes an issue because, for example, when Joe Biden was saying you're not allowed to evict tenants and then a court overruled him, I thought that was illegal of Joe Biden. And so there needs to be some sort of a mechanism to check the president. I think you almost need a secondary federal Supreme Court that has multiple judges on it versus single courts and a single Democratic judge. I believe this might have been a different case, but I think this guy was the guy who gave a soft sentencing to Ray Epps. So that's a little bit shady. And so I think single judges from Democratic districts that were appointed by Democratic presidents checking the current the current president, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And now there needs to be a mechanism for policing the president if he is engaging in illegal behavior. I think we need a different system than district judges. So I think it's a problem that a district judge is giving him a hard time about it. But what they did here of just taking people that they're saying are Venezuelan criminals or gang members, not even necessarily that they committed a crime other than being in a gang, and then just depositing them in a jail seemingly for life, that doesn't seem like, if you want to just ship them back to Venezuela and then Venezuela process them directly into jail, that's on Venezuela. That's not on us. But for us to just take people and never perform a court case and just putting them directly into a jail that's not even their country of origin. And I made a joke on Run Your Mouth that if you're in a gang, you should get a tattoo that just says not a gang member, because I was just saying these are for sure I'm sure that there are some people that ended up in there just because of their tattoos. And there's one lawyer claiming that a guy was a fan of soccer and just got the wrong tattoo. We'll find out whether or not that is a true story or not a true story. If, as a betting man, just with the way the government operates, if you take 300 people without a court case and you just throw them into a jail, how many people you think are going to be innocent? I mean, if you had to throw a number on it, it's going to be more than 2. Do you want to take the over-under on 25? I might even take the over-under on that. I'll probably take the under on 50. But I'm just saying that there's some people that just got sent to a jail in a country that they're not from for life directly from the United States government. And now this is the video of him defending his reason for doing this, and I don't think it's much of a defense.
All right, yeah, let's play the video. That was a good setup.
I'm joined now by the Trump administration's Border Czar, Tom Homan. Mr. Homan, thank you very much for joining us. I want to start with something you said last week that caused a big stir. You said, I quote, "I don't care what judges think." Now, I know you have since said that the administration will abide by court orders. We heard Donald Trump say the same thing. So what do you mean when you say, "I don't care what judges think"?
I don't care what that judges think. As far as this case, we're going to continue to arrest public safety threats and national security threats. We're going to continue to deport them from the United States. I understand this case is in litigation through the Alien Enemies Act, and we'll abide by the court order as litigated. But my quote was, despite what he thinks, we're going to keep targeting the worst of the worst, which we've been doing since day one, and deporting from the.
Here's another just interesting thing to note. I've seen in the past where they'll use a law that hasn't been enforced for a long time, and then you go, hey, that's kind of corrupt. We don't usually use this law. The last time the Alien Enemies Law was used was when we interned the Japanese during World War II. And I don't think there's a lot of people that are pointing to that and going, that was a good American policy. This is a good rule on the books. So when he goes, hey, there is a law on the books that gives us the authority to do so. From what I understand, and I think I read that in the New York Times, the last time that law was used was interning the Japanese. And I don't think people look at that now and go, hey, that was very moral and just what we did during that time.
Yeah, and I must say that I really just cannot stand the kind of ridiculous, like kind of circular argument that'll just be like, well, look, we're concerned that you're not getting the worst of the worst here. And it's like, well, we're going to keep getting the worst of the worst. That's why we're targeting them, because they're the worst of the worst.
Straight just deporting someone, go ahead. If someone's stuck in the country illegally and you want to deport them, I think we should go after the criminals first. But I've also said just make them second-class citizens where they don't get benefits, they can't vote. I think everyone wins, but fine. You want to deport people back to their country of origin, go ahead and do so. You want to go after the criminals first? Great. But you can't just take people and deposit them into a jail without any sort of a court process whatsoever. That's just not what we're talking about here. And that's not even what you're saying when you go, well, we're going to continue to go after criminals and deport criminals. Great. Deport criminals, but don't deposit them into a jail without a court case for life.
Yeah. No, look, if somebody's here illegally, then I think you have a right to force them to leave. But yeah, when you're talking about sending them to a brutal prison in El Salvador, you're going to have to give me at least a little something. Like, we know this is a bad person because of X. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Paint Your Life. I love this company. Let me tell you about them if you haven't heard of them already. Maybe you're looking for a great Mother's or Father's Day gift idea. Maybe you're thinking about something to get your grandmother or something like that. Look no further than Paint Your Life. Now you can get a professional hand-painted portrait created from any photo at a truly affordable price, an unforgettable Mother's or Father's Day gift. You just upload photos to create anything you imagine, put yourself in a location you've always wanted to visit, or you could add a lost loved one to a special occasion to create the portrait of your dreams. There's lots of options. You choose the artist, the art medium, so you can choose oil, acrylic, watercolor, charcoal, and more. And you select from a variety of quality frames. So what you're talking about here is we all struggle sometimes with, like, what's a gift idea that will really mean something, that'll really bring a tear to somebody's eye. And this is the perfect one. Now you can give the most meaningful gift you've ever given at Paint Your Life. And there's no risk. If you don't love the final painting, your money is refunded, guaranteed. Right now, as a limited time offer, you can get 20% off your painting. That's right, 20% 20% off and free shipping. To get this special offer, text the word problem to 87204. Just the word problem, and you text that to 87204. Once again, text problem to 87204. Paint your life. Celebrate the moments that matter most. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Just text the word problem to 87204 to get 20% off at Paint Your Life. All right, let's get back into the show. Anyway, let's keep playing.
United States to the various laws on the books. We're not making this up. The Alien Enemies Act was actually a federal law. It's a statute enacted by Congress and signed by a president. Now that's under litigation, but put that aside. We still have Title VIII authority to remove illegal aliens from the United States, and we're going to continue to concentrate on those who are the biggest threat to our communities, the public safety threats.
But you're going to abide by court orders as long as, you know, and go through your appeals process, but you are not going to defy those orders.
No.
Okay, let me ask you about the flights at issue here, the flights to El Salvador. You have said that everybody on those flights had ties to the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua or to MS-13. Can you give me some background? Help me understand how these people ended up there. Are these people that were recently arrested?
So some were, some weren't. Some have been in custody for a little bit, and some on that plane were Title VIII removals, which means they were ordered removed by the immigration judge, and some other were removed to the Alien Enemies Act. I think about 240 on that flight were Venezuelan gang members, TDA, and I think we had 21 MS-13 members and a couple, specific MS-13 cases. But as far as the Venezuelans on that flight, every single one, according to the information given to me from the field, are members of the TDA. And TDA has been determined to be terrorist organizations. They are now classified as terrorists. So that plane removed 240 terrorists from the United States.
So how do you determine, or how do your people in the field determine that somebody is a gang member?
So there's various methods. I've noticed in the media, a lot of them don't have criminal histories. Well, a lot of gang members don't have criminal histories. Just like a lot of terrorists in this world, they're not in any terrorist database, right? We only know the information what's in databases based on, for instance, most terrorists we arrest that are identified by the U.S. government are later identified through a Title III investigation or through an undercover operation. They're not in any terrorist screening database. We know that. A lot of gang members, I started as a cop in 1984. Many gang members don't have a criminal history. So we have a count of social media. We have a count of surveillance techniques. We have a count on sworn statements from other gang members. We got to count on, wiretaps and Title IIIs. Everything involved with criminal investigations come into play. So just because someone hasn't been arrested and charged with a crime yet, doesn't mean they're a member of a gang.
But how do you? I mean, what we've heard
doesn't
from
mean they are
representing some
let's
of
pause it there. I mean, the obvious problem here is that it also doesn't mean they are a member of a gang. And there is a presumption of innocence, even for people who are here illegally in the country. Maybe not a presumption that they ought to be allowed to stay in the country, but in the same sense that we couldn't just throw them in an American prison, the idea that we could just throw them in a foreign prison does, it seems, and let me just say, well, this guy is good at being kind of like you said, Officer Hardass. And if he's going to be like on a debate against somebody who's arguing for Joe Biden's loose immigration policy, he's probably going to say all the hardcore right things that people want to hear. There's major problems with this. And it's not just, look, there's the first and foremost, it's like, yeah, but like, what if you get the wrong person here? Like you said, Rob, earlier, it's almost a guarantee that at some point you will. And that is the idea of like throwing somebody who doesn't deserve it into one of these prisons on its own is really horrible. And then I would just say, sorry, and then you can go ahead, but then just number two, why I think even like hardcore border restrictionists who support Donald Trump you should be a little bit concerned about this, because you got to think here, man, like, as much as everybody always tells me Donald Trump is playing 4D chess, this is an area where you actually have to play 4D chess to some degree. And look, God forbid there is one or maybe a few of these cases becomes of a high profile example of where you really fucked up. Like, let's say you actually got an American citizen here, you know what I mean? And like they, whatever, didn't have their papers, or fucking they're all tatted up or whatever. Oh my God, the nightmare that's going to be toward the whole project of like deporting illegals and getting border security and all the things that we kind of all want to see. You got to be really careful with this one here, man, because if you got like, I mean, the nightmare of the PR, if you like got an American citizen and had them tortured in one of these jails somewhere, that is really not going to be good. So yeah, this makes me a bit uncomfortable. I think it's something that Trump supporters would be wise to consider the risks associated with a policy like this.
And what he's really explaining here are suspected gang members.
Yes.
That would be until you go in front of a judge and you go, here's all the reasons we think this person is in this gang. And it's, well, we actually busted him at the headquarters. The other people testified. Then fine. Now you've got evidence that the guy's in a gang. And then the next layer to that is that's the problem with these terror designations, is that once you label a group as being terrorists, and in this case, you know, I still think of terrorists as being, they belong to Al-Qaeda, they came into this country and they're trying to blow up our buildings. I'd like to hear a little bit more clarification on why Venezuelan gang members are considered terrorists now. Now, you might say that they're undermining our society through drug trade, or that the Venezuelan government specifically wanted to deposit violent criminals here. But just the fact that you can throw in the terror designation and then go, well, you just belong to this group. Are you the DJ there? Do you deliver the, what is that? At the beginning of this, he said affiliated with the group, or ties to the group. So what does that mean? You were the accountant for them? Like,
or your brother's in the gang or something like that. I mean, like, what? Yeah, it's just very, look, it's very vague. We got to wrap up here in a second, but I do think like this type of like, look, we've been saying this from before the election results came in. It's like, this is where things are going to get dicey, and this is going to be a real test for Donald Trump. And in the same way that, look, again, I'll end on this, but I know I've made this point before, but you know, Martin Luther King, okay, in the Civil Rights Act, the entire thing was performative. And I don't mean this as a knock necessarily, it's just a fact of history, but like, they chose Birmingham, Alabama. They decided to go there because they knew what the reaction was going to be. And they knew they were going to get it on television. And there were millions of white Americans, including many who harbored prejudice of their own. Like many people who still believed in segregation, many people who did not believe in the goals of the civil rights activists. But when they looked on TV and saw, you know, black men in suits and ties getting chased down by like police dogs and fire hoses turned on them, they were just like, no, we can't support that. Like we just can't support this level of violence against people. Now, it's much easier when you see people tatted up, you know, from head to toe. You don't even want to know, like in the same way that Martin Luther King would have his guys wear suits and ties. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason why when you see a guy with face tattoos, you go, I don't know, he's a criminal of some sort, fucking throw him in jail, whatever, you know? But look, in 2017, even though it was all bullshit and the facilities were built by Obama and half of the pictures were taken under Obama, the kids in cages thing really did radicalize and mobilize a lot of Trump's detractors. And it's just something that, number one, whenever you're using violence, and even when it's state violence, you always want to be careful about it, because you don't want to fucking, you know, use it on people who don't deserve it, because that's a bad in and of itself. But it would also, you know, it's like, you got to really pay attention to like how this is going to be perceived and how this could end up backfiring. And the truth is that as furious as Americans were under about Joe Biden's immigration policies, there is a level of violence that the American people will not tolerate. And you want to be really careful about flirting with that. All right, I do have to wrap up there.
I think
go
it might
ahead,
even
sorry,
be
yeah.
worth playing without commentary, but the next part is he does get questioned directly on what was the due process, and essentially says there was no due process, but the Americans that have been victims of gang members, what due process did they have? Which
and he says, what did Larkin Rose? What due process did she have? And you're like, wait, what? That's not what due process is. Like, that's not. And by the way, I believe her killers were convicted of murder. They did have due process, and they did. It's like, yes, no, murder victims don't get due process. It's the reason why we oppose murder. Just so we're all on the same page,
you
right?
can't just throw Muslims in jail after 9/11 and go, well, what the victims of 9/11, what due process do they have? Well, the answer is we got to make sure that these are the people that actually perpetrated the crime. Otherwise,
Yeah, look,
you just have
I mean,
a mechanism
whether
for free people being in jail or innocent people being in
whether
jail.
you're for the death penalty or not, right? There's good reasons on both sides of that issue. Forget where you stand on that. We all recognize there's a difference between that and the state just killing somebody, right? Like, there's a difference between those two things, and we insist that there is due process, that you get a conviction of this person before you do that. That's why it's a crime if you don't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if again, so like if Larkin Rose, am I saying that name right? That's her name, right? Lakin, whatever. So I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just bad with names. But like, had she been convicted of murder in the first degree and then killed, it would be a different story than when she's just some innocent girl and gets killed. That's the whole point. So anyway, like, yes, to your point, it's just a non-answer. He essentially just had no answer for that. And essentially the answer is that they don't get due process. That is an issue. All right, got to wrap up there. Catch you guys next time. See you in Boston this weekend. ComicDaveSmith.com for those tickets. Catch them. Peace.